because sometimes in a business environment, you sometimes really want to see quick results. And with a cultural journey, it is a longer process, and you have to every now and then also deal with a setback. The second one, link initiatives. We tried, and also we failed sometimes, but also we kept trying to align all culture initiatives with business priorities and projects, as we realized it's not like flying very high and talking about culture, but for people this needs to be a daily reality. They need to see that this actually makes a difference for themselves, for their business priorities as well, and to always link it. And then last but not least, communication truly counts. Sometimes it's very small gains which actually are a big gain if you put that into context. We sometimes have maybe a tendency to overlook something which is actually a really great step, but it's maybe not perceived like this, and to really look a little bit closer, especially in cultural initiatives, and zoom out and appreciate what actually truly happened in the organization, where this is maybe not as visible as some of the other projects.
Also including culture in the due diligence process as well as in the integration will really start to get at the core of how all of these process systems and technology work. The culture will help you learn about a wide variety of things, from how decisions are made to what accountability looks like. What are the priorities in that organization? What's most important to them? How do they actually work and show up each day? The culture aspects will really help you understand those pieces. So when you're making decisions on process technology, you can understand where the delta is between your organization and the organization that you acquired. That's why I really feel strongly that culture is one of the best levers that you can use as you're thinking about integrating an organization, as well as when you're thinking about just going out to acquire one.
I'll start with my premise. I believe that let's all work at home concept that some organizations are kind of promoting, I think those organizations over time are going to struggle. I would put a stake in the ground and say that those organizations that believe you can use Zoom or Teams or WebEx or whatever your favorite connecting device is that's going to be the tether between the employee and the employer. And that's going to be the string that ties that individual to the culture of that organization. I believe over time they're going to struggle, and perhaps that string is going to break. And these are some of the things that I really believe we've lost over the last year to year and a half. We have a tendency sometimes to have the pendulum move too far, too abruptly. In the case of COVID, we had to go from a situation where our economy was booming, our job statistics were terrific, and it's not like anything was broken. It's not like we woke up one day and said, oh, we really need to radically change the way we work. The reality was we were hit by a force, an external force, completely unplanned, unpredicted, and in most cases, never even considered, which caused us to dramatically change the way that we work and how we tried to work through a historical pandemic. And the things that we've lost are things that we have to focus on and think about before we just throw them all out, because we've somewhat adapted to a new way of working. And one of those things, in my view, is this notion of connection. I think we've lost a tremendous amount of the connection that we had, connection with our employer, connection with our supervisors, our managers, our leaders, connection with our coworkers, in many cases, connection with our customers and our vendors and other relationships that are really important. We've lost a lot of that, and we've done our best to utilize these streaming services to try to hang on to as much of it as possible. But my belief is we've lost that connection and we need to get it back.
Culture has been important to Sheets for a very long time. It is not delegated to HR, although HR has a critically important role in maintaining this fantastic culture that we've built. Certainly, it is not delegated to HR. It is really starts with our board of directors. Our board has a culture committee, and that culture committee of the board spends 3 hours a quarter talking about culture and the things that are happening within our culture. And in fact, it's our board of directors that has requested that we get a measurement tool to keep a pulse on our culture. And that's how we landed working very closely with Denison to survey our employees. HR's role is really to provide the organization with the tools and our leaders the tools to be successful in shepherding this strong culture that we've created. But it starts from the top. And so it's not just the board of directors. It includes our CEO, Joe Sheets, and our president and COO, Travis Sheets, who are regularly asking critical questions about what we need to be doing to be investing in our culture. I want to set up now as we dive into I think the most important part of this presentation, that's talking about our Sheets Culture Bank. And I wanted to set up that concept before we talk more specifically about what I think is working at Sheets and how we've created such a strong culture. But I wanted to reference something from Dr. Brene Brown. Dr. Brown is a professor at the University of Texas at Austin. She's done some specific work around the anatomy of trust. And she has referenced something called the marble jar. And it's really just a metaphor about how trust is created. And the way that the metaphor goes is that trust is created over time in small amounts. And it's sort of like having a marble jar, is that when you have a situation that creates trust, you put a marble in the jar, and before you know it, you now have a trusting relationship full of marbles in a jar. I love that metaphor, and it really is very consistent with this concept of a culture bank. And that concept came directly from one of our employees. And they actually said it during the pandemic and said, Sheets has been depositing in the culture bank for so many years that it's really what's helping me as an employee, as the employee said, to feel great about working for Sheets during the pandemic. And so this Sheets Culture Bank, we've been working on this for many, many years. We never really called it that, but we've been working on it many years. And it's really the investment that we've been making for a very long time in our culture and in our people.
How can you live your culture if you don't live in your culture? I love this. And of course, culture is broader than our physical boundaries, but there's something about being together that makes a difference. We know that from a SHRM study, Society for Human Resource Management, 2/3 of business leaders are struggling to maintain morale and 1/3 are struggling to maintain culture. From a separate study by Qualtrics, we found that 75% of people were struggling with mental health challenges, with social isolation, depression, anxiety, things like that. And that was perfectly correlated with how much they were working from home. More work from home, more feelings of social isolation. So place matters to our norms, assumptions, values. It matters to the way that we really feel about ourselves and feel about our situations. Here's some interesting data from our study, and this is in particular from a study of 4,400 people globally. We found that people love to work from home because they like wearing their fuzzy slippers and they really appreciate no commute, no surprise there, but they're also missing their people. The other interesting takeaway here is there's no one size fits all. Everybody has different conditions at home, and I may be incredibly productive if I've got a dedicated home office and lots of space and few distractions. Or I may be, working in a small apartment in a major metropolitan area with my partner, and I'm facilitating learning for our children, and I'm caring for somebody in my life who's kind of at an elder age. Those conditions are really different. And so our opportunity is to take what we've learned from this last 16 months and bring it into place, bring it into our awareness of how we create brilliant cultures. I think the other thing that's interesting here is that a lot of people say, we want to come back to the office to collaborate. Maybe we could do all of our focused work at home. We could do all of our collaboration in the office. But we absolutely know that people will want to do all kinds of work in the office. Absolutely, collaboration will be at the top of the list. And people will want to focus. They will want to learn and rejuvenate and form those social connections. And so as we think about the office and kind of coming back, our opportunity will be to really think about variety, think about cultures that allow us that sense of choice, that I really can work in the work cafe or work in an enclave or work away from my typical workstation. That sense of choice, that sense of permission makes a really big difference.
It's very important to ensure that you set up your framework so that DEI is enduring. I think when I talk to other practitioners, when they're kind of setting up their various governance constructs or frameworks, it gives the impression that it's more activity-based and not necessarily systems-based or capability-based. And so you find yourselves having to be in a constant reactive mode as opposed to being proactive. Anytime we get new administration or new legislative requirements, you're constantly having to rework your framework. But if you look at this enduring approach that you kind of see before you on the screen, it gives you a better ability to have a more enduring model in place. And I would also share with you that, a lot of leaders, they struggle with trying to determine how to measure whether they're moving the needle with diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can most certainly measure the diversity piece, looking at the different demographics, within your workforce, but how are you measuring that equity analysis piece, and how are you actually measuring the inclusion piece, which is why I have culture highlighted with the red box, because that's very important. So if you look at the model, policy, how do we have controls in place to ensure that underrepresented and underprivileged individuals are part of those policies and guidance documents. We don't want to have any unintended consequences. So putting that deliberate focus on policy and compliance allows you to be able to put that check and control in place. Talent management, I think this is the most common area that when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion that we navigate to. We want to make sure that we're recruiting, in sources that kind of bring in more diversity into the pipeline. What are we doing from a retention perspective to ensure that we're retaining top diverse talent, and also career development? Are we ensuring that we have the right opportunities, the right equitable opportunities to ensure that our individuals reach their potential like they need to? But I would tell you, when we look at DEI, you cannot just focus just on the talent management piece. That's why I have these other areas in place in the model here. Operations, how do we ensure that we leverage advisory groups, and I won't even call them affinity groups, Brian. I'm very strategic with some of the naming that I'm using here. I call them advisory groups because we want them to have a voice at the table when they get an opportunity to sit with leadership and be a part of these decision-making forums. But how are we leveraging these advisory groups to impact decisions, to impact decision science, as it relates to operations or the business? And then lastly, culture. How are we linking everything that we're doing to culture? How are we ensuring that what we are doing is really moving the needle or really shaping behaviors? I tell leadership all the time when I'm talking to them, if we continue to look at this challenge solely from a compliance perspective, we're going to keep talking about this issue 15, 20 years from now. So you have to have the right balance with looking at this from a compliance perspective and also from a culture perspective. So that's why culture is a very important component of the model that I'm putting in place here.
It is important to tackle the whole system. At the same time, I think it's important to create emotional connection between the employee and the management. it's important also like to create a spirit of caring and discipline. Because I'll be honest with you, like we did see this in our organization, STC. Made it personal, like organization don't change, people do. Okay, again, the impact is increased the STC health for sure. Employee motivation and satisfaction was really, during the time, is growing. And in the same time, the financial result, thanks God, because when you actually focus more inside, the impact and the reflect will be for sure for your customer, for your shareholder, also like for your people inside. Also the customer satisfaction, thanks God, like it's growing. The decrease the customer complaints, resistance to change, which is, like our industry, it's very fast. Our industry is very, dynamic. And that's why we are now ready for any changes. I mean, the STC people. At the same time, the operation costs go down. And also the management leveling and the bureaucracy is actually going down. Still, we have kind of challenges, but at least we know what is the sector or what is the level that we need like to focus more in turn to kill those challenges.
But we're using a lot of these kind of cultural influences to really design and set up that building for us. What I put in front of you here are 9 guiding principles that I wrote for the organization. These are the 9 things that are not negotiable about how we build that future, how we move into our new space that connects the vision for what we're trying to do, a facility that motivates and engages our people to be the best version of themselves and to deliver on that sense of purpose to customers, but also to allow the business to grow and evolve over the next 15 years without a consistent investment in more real estate and growing our physical footprint. So lots of cultural influence statements here about celebrating and recognizing our heritage, but being contemporary and modern, about celebrating customers and that sense of purpose, all the way through to new technology, creating an environment that is much more sustainable in terms of our own footprint, but also that encourages collaboration and teamwork. And we're really repurposing the office for this time next year so that people come in not to do their daily tasks, they come in to innovate, to collaborate, to spend time together. And if they want to do a day of process or emails or thought time, by all means do that at home or in a space that's right for you. So we're going into this new hybrid environment, but we think we've got a sound culture and that platform to build upon as a starting point. And then this last slide just brings all of that together in terms of what we call progressive working. It links to the Progress Together branding for our future ways of working. There are 3 core components to that. One is that collaborative workspace that we're designing at 100 Liverpool Street. The second part of that is the new digital technology and collaboration tools that we're investing in. And the third, then related more to culture, is about that new hybrid working framework, giving more people more choice and discretion about when they work, how they work, where they work, and how they choose to engage with the organization, albeit in the context of the highly regulated organization that we are.
Mainly what we found initially through our resilience campaign and more recently through looking at this culture data and working with clients is communication and transparency are so important during crisis. Oftentimes when you can't really tell people what to expect, at least describing how you're making that decision, what you're doing now, it is really important. And we saw that was what some of our clients appreciated most and their employees appreciated most about leaders within the organization was how they're making sure everyone was informed about what was going on. And so taking the learnings of how people dealt with that, how you created change quickly as an organization, and internalizing that in a way that you can use that moving forward, take the best of what you did and internalize that and use that moving forward is important. And then capability development we've seen is one of those that's lagging behind a bit. And so in 2021, that's going to be one that's so important to be thinking about. What does the future of our organization look like, and how do we continue to build on the skills that we've had in the past and target specific skill sets that we'll need moving forward?
Culture is not the sole responsibility of human resources. If you see our declaration, maybe human resources have incidence in the first one, what is people focused, but then client, trust, long-term view, innovation, principles, It's not it's a responsibility of all organization, of all the areas. It's very related to the way the organization operates, makes decisions, and obtains its results. So it was the first thing we needed to make sure that culture wasn't understood like, CHRO has this presentation and they have many things to do in HR. No. This is something that we are all responsible for and we need to work on. We are one company with presence in 7 countries. So that's very important. That's one of the things that make people talk about culture, but it's not enough. So if you want to really move the culture, for us, we realized that we needed to intervene how we do things and how we make decisions as a group, as a company, and how we did it through the leaders, basically, because they are the representation of the organization. And at the end of the day, when you intervene those levels of the culture, you start to realize that slowly but steadily, we start to find a way the organization thinks, right? A certain way of common mind of the organization that we all have, and we already know how we have to address things because we all make part of this big way of thinking.
I think the greatest leadership challenge of the future will be the ability to build trusting, sustainable communities. That is what I think the future is. It's always been with us. Leadership, everybody in the community has got to feel that they are responsible and that they are a leader. And this is what we've now been working on with the Maasai, with Aboriginals in Australia, to look at what is a model that works. It is around the hard knowledge, the visible leadership, the community and the culture, and the invisible leadership, with trust at the center, that absolute core essence of trust. And what does that community look like?
It seems that either stated or implied in the maps, we have these same issues. There are the issues of, do we have a clear shared external vision? Or are we in a fog? Are we really truly adaptive, and can we maintain this customer focus and adapt around it? Or are we kind of rigid and hidebound by bureaucracy on the internal side? Is there a sense of continuity and consistency, or do we have the opposite? Is there a sense of involvement from all people across departments, or do some departments or people within departments feel somewhat alienated? And of course, the whole idea of organizations is to create synergy, but you can't create synergy unless we somehow meet in the middle and create some shared understanding of reality.
But we use this framework and the Denison 360 to structure what to do, and how to guide this transformation, and also how best to coach and support our leaders through it. We actually put pen to paper and wrote down, our vision, mission, and values. We went off-site as a small group. We had a cross-functional group and came up with a straw man that we wanted to discuss with the team. And then we socialized this with the organization, section by section, and solicited feedback.
I'm interested in hearing about the culture journey that you've been on here at UniSA. And I'm interested in starting, I guess, with your initial impressions, having moved from Dublin in 2013, and how you found the organisation coming into it as their Vice Chancellor and President.
I guess, thanks, Dermot. I mean, 8 years is a long time, and there's been a lot of water under the bridge since then. Yeah. But if I cast my mind back to those kind of early days, like as a new Vice Chancellor, you're trying to get the temperature of the organisation, you're trying to come up to speed, and you're trying to deal with the difference between anecdote and reality, because I think every new leader, oftentimes the best is presented to them, the kind of rose-coloured glasses are put on, and you want to be able to say if that's a realistic representation of the organisation that you're taking on. So I think when I arrived, it was the opportunity to in some way interrogate culture, but also to try and start to define a culture was there, and as a scientist, I wanted an evidence base.
So for you, part of it was about getting a real picture about what was going on within the organisation, on which to then be basing some decisions going forward?
Yeah, I guess if you're going to make a change, you need to have a baseline from which you're going to make a change. The institution that I was coming into was in that, I guess, malleable phase where it was investing in research, it was trying to do good in teaching, it was engaging with industry, but it didn't have an overarching thread which brought that all together. And I felt enterprise was going to do that. But to be able to say we will be the University of Enterprise, I had to do the baseline of what are we, and then in some way have some mechanism to look back and see whether we've made a change.
We said at that point of time, let's go ahead and understand what's happening in the organization. So we decided that phase one will be operation uplifting. So we'd like to understand what's happening. What are the quick fixes? What are the essential things that we'd like to work on as well? What is the right organization to support that as well? And again, if you look at every single step in our journey, we focus on the people and the organization to ensure, for example, they are the key player in doing so as well. And then once we fix that, we start optimizing and standardizing how to do, for example, things in a more optimized way, in a more cost-efficient way, in a more, for example, forward-looking way as well. And that's where we are actually almost there today. And the third part, which is basically sustainability innovation, which is basically how can we continuously grow? How can we basically be more of innovation and bringing new ideas to grow the business as well? Having said that, that's what basically the journey was into place. And just to clarify, in every single step, and I recall when we joined at that point of time, we wanted to make sure that the journey and the changes and the activities is basically being done through the people.
And then just a few minutes on lessons learned. I talked about some of those drivers, those 6 things that we felt drove this, but also some lessons learned. Don't overreact. Make sure you understand the data. Make sure you understand, acknowledge what's in the qualitative feedback that you get, not just the quantitative data. And then, this is a journey. It's not a 1-year sprint. This is a continuous process. Tackle what you can. Listen, we disseminate the results of the survey to the organization. We disseminate them down to the leadership team. They disseminate down to the managers. But listening is also an important part of that journey, because you have to make sure that the conclusions you reach are validated in that feedback process. The organization watches, right? And if you ask for them to give you their feedback and then don't act on that feedback, there's risk associated with that. So make sure that you do act, right? Keep that in balance with, don't try to take on too much, but make sure you do act. This one for us, I think it was a subtle piece of messaging, but it created that. I personally think it created that empowerment. We went from describing it as Denison's survey, which it could be treated as a transactional occurrence happening once a year. And we made sure to change the name of it. We didn't refer to it as the Denison survey, we referred to it as my survey. It's the employee's opportunity to share with the organization what they're thinking, good or bad. We ask them to be candid. We ask them to share how they're feeling, tell us if they're doing good things, tell them if there's misalignment. But that subtle messaging, I think, in particular on my survey, had a direct correlation, I personally believe, on the high participation rate that we've experienced over the last 4-ish years. And then my last piece is commit to it. It consumes a lot of time. And it's not just the CEO, it's got to be the leadership team as well. Your managers have to believe that this is important as well. Like I said earlier, it's not a 1-year sprint.
Culture and leadership have always been a part of our practice, because in fact, they're really 2 sides of the same coin. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Does culture drive leadership, or does leadership drive culture? Well, the answer is yes. I mean, over the short term, you join a new organization as a new leader, you're going to react to the situation that you're in. You're going to try to fit in. You're going to try to make your own changes, find your own spot, gather some traction, learn about the organization, and try to fit in. But on the other side, over time, where does the culture of the organization come from? Well, it comes out of the activities of the people, especially the leaders. And so over time, the culture reflects a social learning process that's driven by the leaders in an organization, but involves all of the members of an organization as they, learn the lessons that are most important to helping the organization survive and thrive, and then pass those on to the next generation of team members and of leaders. So, the long and short of it is that the people make the place. Yes, the place influences the people, but in fact, no one of these hands makes the circle. Okay, it's the group learning, it's the collective process. That's what builds the culture. Leadership development and organizational change are often quite separate within organizations. The bigger the organization, the more separate they are. They may have different bosses, they may report up to different parts of the organization. They may have different tools, models, approaches that in some cases are actually pretty complex. And there's a lot of value in combining these and aligning them, because after all, do you want to develop leaders that help build the culture for the past? No, I don't think so. The future's coming at us faster and faster every day. And so developing leaders in a way that converges with the plans for developing the culture for the future really has a lot of benefit.